Hey friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today we're looking at ILNP's new arcade collection. So this collection features 6 cream polishes as a part of their brand new studio color line, which I will talk a little bit more about that later. I will, of course, also have some comparisons and share my thoughts at the end, but for now, let's get into the swatches. The first polish we have is Ink, and this one is a black cream polish. So this one was such a dream to apply. It was super opaque, I would say fully opaque in one coat. And with these new paddle brushes on the Studio Color Line polishes, it just made application super easy. So we got off to a great start, but it certainly set my expectations a little too high for the rest of the polishes. Next up, we have one of my favorites. This one is called High Score, and it's described as an electrifying blue-violet cream. So even though I was definitely very excited about this color, I unfortunately lost a lot of the excitement once I started applying this on my nail. As you can see, I kind of am struggling to get even just this corner of my nail painted. But yeah, the first coat was definitely very streaky and patchy. I would describe this as an almost crelly kind of formula. So here on the second coat, I did go in a little bit heavier to just cover up all the bald spots that I had. And I would say that this polish was a 2-coater for me, so it ended up working out in the end. But yeah, that first coat just really threw me off. I was not expecting the formula to be that way, but the color is absolutely gorgeous. And again, it's definitely one of my favorites. So I am a little conflicted, but at least it's 2 coats. Next up, we have Pixel Pink, and this one is a bright medium toned pink that I feel like is a little bit dusty, but still very bright at the same time. I guess it seems dusty compared to the 2 neons that we'll be seeing next. But yeah, I really am a fan of this pink. I feel like it can work as like a Barbie core pink, sort of, but it's not super bright or neon exactly. So it's really fun in my opinion, but it really was the formula that kind of let me down again. As you saw in the first coat, it did provide a lot more even coverage compared to High Score, where it wasn't nearly as patchy or streaky. But even on the second coat, I feel like I could still see through to my nail line a little bit, at least in real life. I think on camera you can't really tell that much. But yeah, this one was just another shade that leaned more on the crelly side, and it wasn't giving me that creamy, full coverage opacity that I was expecting. So I ended up needing 3 coats for this one. I think if your nails are shorter and you have little to no free edge, you might be able to get away with just 2 coats, but personally, for a cream polish, I would have loved if this one was just opaque in 2 coats instead of 3. The next polish we have is Turbocharged, and this one is an energizing neon orange cream. So it might not look super neon there in the bottle shot, but hopefully once you see me applying it here on my nail, you can see just how loud of a neon this is. It's like an electric traffic cone or something. So as you can see, I sort of struggled with the application where I needed to dip back into the bottle a couple of times, but at least this first coat was the most even coverage. So all of these do self-level really nicely. It really is just the creaminess or opacity of the formulas that I wasn't super in love with. But I did manage to get this one opaque in 2 coats. I think maybe in certain angles, like in direct sunlight, you might be able to make out your nail line a little bit if you have long nails like I do. But for the most part, this should be a solid 2-coater. Next up, we have Vaporwave, and this one is described as a vivid coral red cream. So even though it might look red in the bottle there, I personally would just describe this as a hot pink neon. I guess it could lean a little bit coral, but either way, I do love the color, and the formula looked promising here on the first coat. It was very even coverage, so I thought it was going to be a solid 2-coater, but unfortunately it wasn't. I think this one is another shade that just has too much of a crelly leaning formula, and so you can still see my nail line a decent amount, and I just wasn't really loving that. I think for this line to be announced as cream polishes, I was expecting them to be just more full coverage, having that rich, creamy formula. And even after 3 coats, I feel like you can still see my nail line a tiny bit, so it was a little disappointing to not have 100% opacity, but I still love this shade. And rounding out the collection, we have Retro Teal, which is just described as a surreal teal blue cream. So this one is definitely another favorite as far as the color goes, and I would say the formula is definitely pretty similar to High Score or Pixel Pink, where on the first coat it was pretty patchy, you see a lot of light spots. It just didn't really wow me. So I was hoping that it would be dark enough to be fully opaque on 2 coats. And again, normally I am, heavy-handed with my coats, but I found that this one just still was very crelly leaning, not giving me that creamy, full coverage opacity. So I really think if you are somebody who does do thinner coats, a lot of these polishes will require 3 coats for full opacity. And that's what I needed for the shade. But even though I don't love that, I still loved the color of this one. It's definitely such a beautiful summer blue. I love teals in the summertime, so I still like this. So looking at comparisons, we're starting with High Score and looking at it next to Mooncat's Midnight Drive. So they definitely are very similar when it comes to these really bright, almost neon kind of shades, but High Score is a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit dustier than Mooncat's Midnight Drive. I feel like that one can also lean a little bit more indigo leaning, but High Score definitely feels very purple to me. Next up for Pixel Pink, I had to show this next to Cirque's Socialite from their Vice collection last year because it's the only other kind of neon pink in this sort of color family that I have. But as you can see, Cirque Socialite is a lot more blue leaning while Pixel Pink is more red leaning. So they're definitely not dupes. And here you can see what I meant when I said Pixel Pink has that slight dustiness to it. Next up for Turbocharged, we are obviously going to be comparing it to Cirque's Pyro, which is also from their Vice collection last year. It's the only super hot neon orange that I have in my collection. I know there's also Orly's Artificial Orange, but at least compared to Pyro, it's definitely very similar. I do want to say I think maybe mine has faded because unfortunately a few of my Vice shades have faded, so it is a little bit lighter looking, but pretty similar. Next for Vaporwave, I of course had to show this next to Cirque's Game Over, which is the iconic neon red of the season. And I really wanted to show this just because I, again, don't really think I would call Vaporwave a coral red. I would just call it a hot pink. So here on the nail, you can see just how pink leaning it is. Obviously, with these 2 neons, they did freak out my camera the most out of all the swatches so far. So this isn't exactly color accurate. Game Over looks a little orange leaning when it is red, but they're definitely not dupes. And lastly, for Retro Teal, I wanted to show this next to Mooncat's Abandoned Boardwalks, which I wouldn't really call a teal, but it's definitely one of the closest shades that I have to this ILNP shade. It's obviously a lot more blue leaning and a little bit darker, but these both have that same really bright intensity. And I also wanted to show this next to Olive Ave's Ironic from last year's summer collection. This one is another favorite teal of mine, but obviously, as you can see, this leans a lot more green. So once we swatch them all on the nail, I feel like they make such a beautiful gradient where Retro Teal is pretty much in the middle, but maybe closer to Abandoned Boardwalks, so no dupes. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for ILNP's new arcade collection. So as I mentioned before, this is a part of their new studio color line, which is basically just going to be a line for their cream finishes, similar to how they have a line of ultra metallics or ultra hollows. I forget exactly what they're called, but their studio color is where you would find more of their cream finishes. So that's exciting because I think that means that we'll be seeing some more creams from ILNP. But yeah, as far as this collection goes, I definitely would love to know what your thoughts are because I am kind of conflicted. I mean, I do really love the arcade theme. I think they did such a great job nailing the inspiration with the colors and the names. Like, they're just so fun, and it does really bring back those like summer memories, like playing arcade games at the Boardwalk and staying up super late playing video games. So I love the theme, and I think that makes me enjoy this color palette a little bit more than I normally would, because I imagine if you're not super into that, you're gonna be like, this is a little all over the place. Like, we have 2 neons, and then the other 3 colors are bright and colorful, but still like a little bit muted or dusty in some ways. And then we also have a black. So that's like not what I would expect for their first summer release. If anything, I could see this working really well for their second summer release. So it makes me curious to know like what they're gonna release next. But I think this is such a fun lineup and so cool and colorful and just really unique and interesting for the summer. But yeah, obviously my biggest gripe with these is their formulas, unfortunately, where I wouldn't say that they were bad enough to the point that I'm like disappointed in them, but I'm just overall kind of unimpressed. And I hate to say that because this is ILNP's second ever cream release. Their first one was their poolside collection from I think 2, maybe 3 summers ago. And that was a beautiful, stunning lineup of neon shades. And I am pretty sure I've heard good things about the formulas on those polishes. So I don't know, with them announcing that they're gonna have this like studio color line and presumably, you know, they'll be working on more creams in the future, I kind of was expecting the formulas to be a little more creamy and like full coverage on the first coat. Not necessarily one coaters, because I know that's kind of like few and far between among brands. But when I was doing the first coats of these polishes, obviously with the exception of the black, I was just a little like, oh, yikes, you know, this isn't what I was expecting. I mean, I think I got full coverage in 2 coats on just 2 of the shades, but again, like I am a little heavy-handed. So if you do thinner coats, I imagine that the majority of these, with the exception of the black, are going to need 3 coats for full coverage. And I don't know how I feel about that, because these are supposed to be cream polishes, but they kind of perform more like crellies. And I am kind of forgiving of that, like at least maybe with the neons, because I feel like neons tend to be a little bit like thinner or more on that crelly side. So that way when you build them up, it just builds the intensity of the color. But for like the pink, for example, I was like, why is this 3 coats? You know, it was a little bit of a letdown, but again, like I wouldn't say that the formulas are bad. Like they all apply really well. It really is just the coverage that kind of left me unimpressed. So I would love to know what your thoughts are down below in the comments so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.